The New York Knicks are one game away from the Eastern Conference Finals. To help get us ready for Game 6, I'm joined by Tony East, the host of the Locked On Pacers podcast. We dive into Jalen Brunson's dominance, whether Indiana has any answers, the rebounding battle, and is this a legacy game for Tyrese Haliburton? All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The New York Knicks are on the brink of getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. It feels oh so close. I can almost taste it, but they're not quite there yet. One more game in Indiana where the Pacers have obviously won every single game in this series. So it is going to be a challenge, going to be fun. Talking things over with Tony East on how the Knicks can potentially get it done and what to expect from the Pacers in their response. Before we get into that, I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we are now available on all platforms. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscription button and that notifications bell to ensure you never, ever miss an episode. And then if you're on the go, listening on your morning commute into the city or out of the city, be sure to hit that auto download function on your podcast platform of choice. And I haven't said this in a while. I need to start saying it everywhere. So please, please, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It helps us keep doing this 5, 6, 7 days a week and helps more people find the podcast. And I personally really appreciate it. So without further ado, let's get into it with Tony right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Tony East, the host of the Locked On Pacers podcast. We talked pre-series, Tony. This is like two friends on either side of a war, and we've been separated for years. They called a ceasefire. We're back together. We're like, oh, you almost got shot there. I almost got shot here. But, you know, we're both still alive. Our teams are both still alive, at least for now. And I want to ask you how real you think Game 5 was, because, like, I'm really excited right now. I'm sure Pacers fans are probably a little bit down, and we both felt the exact opposite way 24 hours ago. So, like, coming into Game 6, are you confident that, like, this in Game 4, like, the aggregate is probably true, or like, where do you lean on how Game 5 translates into Game 6 and potentially Game 7?
Yeah, I think Games 5 is as real as the Knicks feel about Game 4 being real, right? Like, you know, that's just, you play bad in a game in a series and hope you can bounce back the way the Knicks did from Game 4 to Game 5. And Rick Carlisle said this after, I can't remember which game. The Pacers won this game. But after the game in this series, he said, every game for us in the whole postseason, including the first round, has been different, right? There hasn't been two games that felt really similar. And some of that is because of who the Pacers are, and some of that's because of who their opponents are and who's setting them the tempo and all that kind of stuff. But you know, it's not as much, like, it feels like a lot of Knicks games are like, oh, it's 99-95 with 2 minutes to go. You know, every Pacers game's been different and unique and taken on a new life. And so even if the Pacers had won Game 5, I would have said, I don't know how much you can read into it going forward, just because of that fact that they've been kind of all over the map, and the playoffs are better or worse, and they've been good at adjusting, right? I think they'll be more prepared for, now they have tape for a different starting five, and how they can help Haliburton on both ends of the floor against it, because he did not have a good game, which we'll talk about later. But, you know, the Knicks had an awful Game 4. Pacers had an awful Game 5. And the responses to those are more going to be the realness and what you find out about the team than the bad performances themselves, as we've seen in this series.
So, and maybe this conversation is Tyrese Haliburton. If it is, we can start with that. But how does Indiana get their rhythm back offensively? That, again, is only dissipated for one game. Outside of that, they've been the best offense in this entire playoffs. And, like, I look at that just as much of a question as it is with the Pacers, as it is, like, if the Knicks can kind of bring that focus and connectivity defensively again, because the Knicks have just been an extraordinarily inconsistent defensive team. They've had months this year where they were the best defense in the NBA. They had a month this year where they were the worst defense in the NBA. They've had times even with OG Anunoby, like in April, where they were like a pretty mediocre defense. They've been a pretty mediocre defense in the playoffs. Last night without Anunoby, they were inexplicable, maybe not inexplicably, but surprisingly.
Oh, I can explain
on that end of the floor. Sorry, what?
I can explain it.
Yeah, you can explain it.
Every rebound for the whole game.
That helps. And, like, and certainly, like, the shot disparity is, like, maybe where you have to start. And, like, obviously that a lot harder to score a lot of points if you're not taking a lot of shots. And Indiana tried, because they were cooking from three, started up 11 for 19 from three. We're taking more free throws than the Knicks. We're making all their free throws and yet could not stay in this game because of that shot disparity. So I'm assuming that is your biggest focal point, even more so than anything Haliburton specific.
Yeah, my entire lead segment after Game 5 was the rebounding, because The difference in field goal percentage, 3%, you can overcome that if you have more possessions or you make more free throws. They did make more free throws and they took more. They shot a better percentage from 3, but they took 29 fewer shots.
Hard to win that way.
Like, that's insane. That's like a quarter of a game. Like it's like a full quarter where one team shoots and one team doesn't, right? Like that's it's a little more than that, but like that's impossible to overcome, right? And I'm not saying they played great outside of that. Like they had 36 points in the paint. That's awful. That would have been one of their worst numbers the entire regular season or postseason. Knicks did really well to cut off the rim last night. They were deterring drives much better. I think Deuce McBride was a good part of that, no matter who he was guarding, but often it was Haliburton, right? That was huge, and that's part of the Pacers getting their mojo back is getting to the rim. But if they take 85 shots, they score more points. Like, duh, right? And we talked about this before the series, right? They want to play at least play fast, not even in transition all the time, but play fast. If you're taking the ball to the net over and over, or you can't get a rebound, you can't do that at all. And the Knicks did a great job of dominating. Dominating is not the right word. What's higher than that? What is in the hierarchy of words of butt kicking? What's the top word? That's what they did on the glass, and that's the whole game.
It's called Hartensteining after that.
God, he was so good. And that's it. Like, everything stems out from that to me. They couldn't play their style. They couldn't get enough possessions to get any rhythm. Every chance they had to make a run, they cut it to 7. The Knicks are like, just kidding, we're up 16 again. Like, that's the whole game. And so, yeah, there's stuff they can do better. And the top of it is get into the paint and get their star guard going. But 29 shots, like, that's the game. That's it. You just lose. And that's not to say it's luck. Like, that's what the Knicks do. That's credit to the Knicks. Their style. They were Knicksy. That's the word I keep using all series. If the Knicks are Knicksy, they win the game. So the Pacers can't let that happen again.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of confidence on the Knicks side of things that Game 4 was an aberration. Game 5 is who this team really is. And I agree to some extent that the way the Knicks played is who the Knicks really are. The question is, do they have the energy to pull that off one more time, 2 more times if necessary? And also, what's Indiana going to do to fight against that? But I just look at the number of guys who played just dramatically differently than they did in Indiana. I mean, Hartenstein, like we opened our show previewing Game 5, like talking about how Hartenstein, like, just hasn't been himself. And like, and there were stretches this season where just like he had an Achilles injury and he wasn't really himself. And like, now it made total sense because Mitchell Robinson out, like, he's playing more minutes and higher stakes minutes than he's ever played in his NBA career. And that is an adjustment for a guy whose like whole identity is going balls to the wall. I thought Precious Achiuwa sucked in this series and until last night. And defensively in particular, I thought he was going to be such a weapon, such an X factor for the Knicks with his ability to switch, with his ability to protect the rim. If he got time, Mitchell Robinson gets hurt. I'm feeling weirdly confident that wasn't going to affect the series. And it ended up like pretty dramatically affecting the series because Precious was not the guy we saw in the regular season who, like you were highlighting in the one Knicks win, like kicked the Pacers' butt this year. And then all of a sudden last night, whether it was like switching onto Nembhard, tracking him and blocking him, like intercepting passes off the ball, like offensively, like crashing at the right times, like making the right passes out. He was really good in his minutes. And Deuce is maybe the biggest example for someone who was so good against the Sixers, and it just hasn't translated. The decision-making wasn't there. The defensive focus wasn't there. Just the combination, I think, of starting him and empowering him by like telling him like, all right, like go bug Tyrese Haliburton the way the entire Pacers roster has been bugging Jalen Brunson. Like, it unlocked something. And I thought he was really good. The Knicks closeouts were much sharper. Their switches were much sharper. It was just a higher level game. And like, Tony, let me know if you disagree with this. Like, I think if the Knicks play like that, even in Indiana, it's going to be difficult for the Pacers to come out and beat them. They're capable of doing it just because they can't play at such a great pace and they can't shoot it so well. I think the Knicks are probably the better team, even without Anunoby playing like that. It's a question for me if they can do it again, but a reasonable mind might totally disagree because you watch Game 4, you'd have the totally opposite interpretation of the situation.
No, and if the rebounding battle's that again, it doesn't matter if the Pacers play better. Like, I'd have to do math, but like the amount of efficiency gap you'd have to overcome a 29 shot difference is unbelievable. I hate to go back to the same thing I just talked about, but you know, a lot of stuff the Knicks did was better. Like Deuce, that was his best game of the series to me. Precious, that was his best game of the series to me. But you missed the thing that was the biggest difference from games 3 and 4 to Game 5. Brunson's back or something.
I was talking defense more, but yeah, that's I mean that's why it mattered, right? Because he made it impossible for Indiana. Yeah, go ahead.
This was the first game I noticed. Maybe it's been happening more than I've realized, but like, sometimes in these games where Haliburton takes fewer shots, he had 9 in this game. Like he'll give it up and then the Pacers won't get it back to him. And I'm not saying that to knock the Pacers guys not giving it back to him this time. In past games, that was the case. This time it's because Deuce McBride is like, oh, he's 40 feet from the basket. Okay, I'm going to guard him like way out there, even when he doesn't have the ball, and let them play 4-on-4. That's what the Pacers need to punish. Not necessarily get Haliburton the ball. I mean, they do need to unlock him. He needs to take more than 9 shots, but like it's 4-on-4. You have a ton of space. Like you have to get a good shot out of that with someone else, and they weren't doing that. And I thought when McBride started, the guy who would be the key was Siakam, who is now going to be guarded by at most a 6'4" player, unless Hartenstein guards him, which I think they should do. And then Miles Turner is the key for the same reason. And they could not get the front court punishment that I thought they needed to what they did. I mean, Siakam and Turner were fine. They were 13 for 27. That's okay, right? They had 38 combined points, but one of them needed to be like really good. And they didn't hit that level against a smaller group. So
yeah, I think it's important to note, Tony, also like Siakam had 8 points right at the start of the fourth. Like not that the game was out of reach at that point, but through 3 quarters, I thought Hart did a pretty darn good job on him.
He did. And yeah, we didn't see Siakam make like a 6-move combo right before halftime over Josh Hart again. That was such a shot.
Nasty. Yeah,
that was
I didn't like it, but it was sick. Yeah.
But either way, like that's what they'll need Haliburton has to be better. Like we'll get there, but they need a front court guy to dominate that. Like that's a huge size disadvantage, right? And Josh Hart plays bigger than his height, but there's like you're still that size. Like there's still only a certain level of contest you can have. So I agree with you that defensively that did work and disrupt the Pacers in a meaningful way. But yeah, the biggest difference beyond the rebounding was Jalen Brunson took 35 shots and they were all really good. And he's really hard to guard.
All right, so let's talk about him next on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Pacers. We'll get into Brunson and what adjustments Indiana can have to maybe contain him just a bit better than they did. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. All right, Jalen Brunson, battle the point guards. It's sort of lived up to the hype, except for the fact that they've been good in different games. Like game 1 was Brunson. Game 2 was kind of both of them. Game 2, and then game 3, Brunson gets hurt. Haliburton's incredible. Brunson's really good down the stretch. Not quite enough. Game 4 totally goes to Haliburton. Game 5 totally goes to Brunson. To me, he looked, and I've heard everyone say today, like I saw a tweet like when you play bad, you're hurt. When you play good, you're healthy. And I do get that. I do get that.
I disagree in this series that's been keep going. For Haliburton, that has not been the case.
And I don't think it's been the case for Jalen Brunson either. Like I think he legitimately was healthier. Like Brian Windhorst in his recap of game 4 had the stat from Second Spectrum that Brunson was getting 2.5 inches less of average air on his jumper. And I thought it was noticeable, like his acceleration, his decel, his ability to just like beat multiple guys and like jump through the air and do like an up and under layup 35 minutes into his night on like his 31st shot. Like it just all looked a lot better to me. He seemed sharper. And he wasn't short on his jump shots anymore. And I thought like what was telling was that like Aaron Nesmith, who looked so good against him in game 3 and 4, was still pretty clearly the Pacers' best option. And like Brunson had like 1 or 2 plays where he just absolutely toasted him. I was like, all right, that was more representative of at least what I saw in the matchup between those two in the regular season. I know Tyrese Haliburton coming out of that game, like he was saying like a lot of it's on him, like where the Knicks found a ton of success was Deuce McBride setting screens, like finally like or Jalen Brunson like screening for Deuce and like forcing Haliburton like into the action, like forcing him to double the ball. And Haliburton was coming out and saying like, yeah, I just wasn't good enough doing that. Like there were times in the first half where he split it or like I didn't like get a good enough trap. And Brunson was able to do exactly what he wants to do in those situations, which is generally like drag it out, typically to the left side, whip it back to the middle and let the Knicks play 4-on-3. Tony, this is unofficial, but like I count in the first half, like 5 for 5 shooting. When Jalen Brunson passed out of a double team for 12 total points, like the Knicks were just hyper efficient every time the Pacers doubled him. Haliburton like noted that like it got better in the second half. I agree. Like I think the Knicks were able to pick on that a little bit less. Like there were other factors that ultimately made that irrelevant, namely the Pacers offense, like taking a big dip. And like we didn't even mention this when talking about the defense, but Indiana in this game had a 7-minute stretch in the third quarter after that Miles Turner barrage where they had just 1 point. And then obviously some of this was garbage time, but only scored 5 points over the last 9:45. But I did think the defense in the second half was closer to what they needed, like with their normal offense to compete in this game. I guess this is all a very long-winded way of asking you, like what, if anything, are the answers at this point for Indiana guarding Jalen Brunson?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up what Tyrese said about the defense, because I asked him that. I thought in the first half that was – there you go. I thought that was very telling how often he was involved in what they were doing. And, of course, Brunson had over 40 points again and took a bunch of shots. Like, he got going. What I'm about to say is not to take that away from him. But the other part of it that mattered was in games 3 and 4, like, was it game 2 or game 1 where Hartenstein led the Knicks in assists? I think it was game 2.
I think it was game 2. Yeah.
Yeah, he would pop up at the top of the key, and he's just outside of his floater range. But it's 4-on-3. He's a great passer. You have to respect him because he's just one dribble and does the shot that no one has a good name for, but it always goes in. So he would just facilitate from there. And their offense looked great, and DiVincenzo had 1 billion threes, and they won. And so I was like, oh, they, credit to the Pacers, they adjusted, but like that hasn't been there as much. Well, Brunson being better not only makes Brunson better, it makes that possible again, especially when Haliburton isn't quite recovering the way he needs to, or isn't getting involved in that action the way he's supposed to. So you nailed it. That's how you go 5 for 5, is when that's an easier action to go to. Again, it's not even an action. It's just let Isaiah Hartenstein pass or score or do his thing. And he was really good the whole game. But yeah, it's all possible because, Brunson was awesome and got to his spots and was patient in all the coverages. And I think you're right. And I think Haliburton's right. They got better at it in the second half. They, had to have talked it over at halftime. And I think they'll be better at it for 48 minutes on Friday. But that everything stems from that for the Pacers defensively. And Brunson only has 7 assists, but if hockey assists, secondary assists, I haven't checked it for this game, but he had to have a ton just because of those kind of plays. And they had a lot of those with DiVincenzo having an awful shooting game, right? He's been so like lights out all series until starting in game 4. And the fact that they were able to still do so well playing like that without him going crazy says a lot about how well it was going too. So credit to Brunson for that. And getting Haliburton involved is something I've talked about on the flip side a lot, which is like, this is smart by the Knicks to put Brunson on Aaron Nesmith, because Nesmith's the hardest guy for the Pacers to just naturally throw in and do that, right? Like I've said, the Pacers should be trying to attack Brunson more, whether that's Nesmith setting a screen or a ghost screen, or Nesmith had to play as the ball handler in the pick and roll in game 3 and just got to the basket and scored. He can't do that a lot, but I've been wondering if they could get him involved more for the same reasons you saw in game 5. Like it's one, Haliburton and Brunson are not awesome defenders, and 2, it's taxing on them to then play as well as they want to on the other side of the floor. So the Knicks did much better in that matchup in game 5 than the Pacers did, and I think that's going to be a massive flip going into the next game, or at least hopefully.
Do you think they keep trying to double Jalen Brunson? And is the plan to execute that better, or do they go more so towards the philosophy of like, hey, you're going to need to score 50 if you want to beat us, and dare Jalen Brunson to go do that? Yeah,
every team that's daring him to score a lot of points, he's done.
He's like, okay. He's generally like, okay, cool, thanks. But I would, that might be the way I would.
Yeah, I brought it up in our series preview, like the Miami series last year. They were like, yeah, Brunson scores, but you want? And he's like, okay, like he just does it, right? And Miami won that series, but like no one has had a bunch of success. I don't know. It's just there's a reason teams keep doubling him despite him scoring 40+ points, and it's because like that doesn't work that well. It's just hard. He's good. He's so good. It's really hard.
Yeah, and I think he's gotten more used to it this year. Like once Julius Randle went out, this is just like the number of traps he saw went up exponentially, and like you could see him slowly but surely figured out as the season went along. And the big difference from this series to the Miami series, like whatever the other coverages are, like the Knicks don't have a lot of great tertiary options. They don't have a lot of great shot creators, but they have just enough. And Alec Burks, like out of the blue, is like that's the other guy I didn't mention earlier, like talking about guys having like major nights.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I said it yesterday. It's literally, it was like the best case scenario for Bojan Bogdanovic this series is essentially what they've gotten from Alec Burks. And that's like such a godsend for the Knicks. But if there's someone who is due to have just a bad night, it's Alec Burks, because this is just so far like head over heels over like the best we could have hoped for from him. But Tony, before we move on to Haliburton, like, are there any other like defensive adjustments you're looking for out of Indiana in game 6?
It's weird because like in the first half of this game, I said that, I mean, maybe I'm just dumb, but like, the Knicks changed their starting 5, and that's obviously a significant adjustment, but like nothing about the first half of game 5 felt like so different from game 4-3. It's just the Knicks were playing a lot better, right? So maybe again, McBride was out there for 40 minutes instead of however many he played in game 4. Maybe that mattered a lot. Like it did change the makeup of the game, right? But there wasn't like anything so noticeable, like, oh wow, that's so different and killing the Pacers. Like, oh, this very new thing is something the Pacers are going to go to going forward. Like, to me, it's just, they didn't play well. They didn't play well at all. And the possession battle just takes you out of the game so much. Like, guys talk all the time about touching the ball. It helps you with the rhythm and, being involved in a game and all that. Like, they didn't, I don't know if you're a soccer fan at all, Gavin, but like they have time of possession stats. Like time of possession in this game would have been comical. That would have been a funny one. I've never actually seen that for basketball. This is the first game it would have mattered. And so it obviously, again, it was a different game. There were adjustments. We've talked about a lot of stuff that looked different and unique to this game already, but it didn't feel appreciably different from game 4 or 3 to me, which the Pacers won both those games. I'm not saying that to give the Pacers credit. I'm just saying the Knicks played that much better. And so there's not a ton I want to draw back on. It's just like the Pacers have to box someone out. Go get the ball, right? Like if Brunson, they've won games with Brunson playing really well. They won game 3, right? Like they have to box out. They have to have chances to score to win. If they play the same game again, they will just lose. And Haliburton is, of course, when we get to a part of that.
I think the biggest thing there is just and look, they were doing this at times and not succeeding, but like finding ways to get multiple bodies on Isaiah Hartenstein. I think the Knicks were asking Isaiah Hartenstein to do what they typically only ask Mitchell Robinson to do, and that is to be like a one-man offensive rebounding army. And like obviously, look, Dante had some good crashes. Like Hart had like got his own 3 at the end, so it wasn't just him. But they wanted that a lot more because like they needed to get back and slow down Indiana in transition. It's been such a nightmare for them, like finding the right matchups and like not having 3 guys on Tyrese Haliburton. And some of that was just like essentially taking game 4 off and clearly being refreshed mentally in this game. But I also think a big part of it was just getting more guys back on defense. And I think if Indiana, like especially early in the game, can just fixate on like blocking out Tyrese Haliburton, it'll get closer to the trade-offs we talked about in the previews for the series where like other guys might crash for the Knicks and there might be plays where they succeed doing that, but there are going to be plays where Indiana gets the rebound and then gets easy buckets going the other way. I think the challenge for the Pacers is like it's counterintuitive as you would assume the Knicks are a much better offensive rebounding team with Precious Achiuwa on the floor than with Deuce McBride on the floor, but it's much you're just a longer amount of space you have to cover when you're coming off Deuce McBride at the 3-point line than when Precious is out there and like you have one big whose foot is always parked in the paint. And I think that was part of the brilliance of that adjustment for the Knicks. The
distance you cover, and the other part of this that I talked about is, what's hard to do is like when you're scrambling defensively in a 4-on-3 to figure out who you're supposed to box out, like who's actually your guy. So if the Knicks get the shot up quick when that defense breaks down, there's like 1 second where everyone does this. A lot of people are listening and not watching, so they couldn't see that I just looked backwards over my shoulder. Like it was a very dramatic turn.
I want to say it was like theatrical, but
that moment matters, right? Like a split second matters a great deal. Like you get run past, or Isaiah Hartenstein gets position on you in that minute or second, whatever. So that is credit to the Knicks too. Like getting the shot up quick after the defense rotates helps with rebounding, and the Nuggets have been great about that for years, and you're really seeing it in this series come to fruition as well.
All right, so let's take one more break and talk about a legacy game for Tyrese Haliburton. That might be melodramatic, not my guy, so I can say it. You might not agree with that, but I'm throwing it out there. Legacy game for Tyrese Haliburton.
This next segment is sponsored by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, some big, some small. When we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. But therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. Therapy benefits so many people who have had wonderful experiences. It can be helpful for learning positive coping skills or setting boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who have experienced major trauma or something similar. If you are thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. How about that? That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so I'll make the case here, Tony, on this being a legacy game.
Killing me.
Yeah, we've had 2 games this series now where Tyrese is not, and look, to your point, this might be more on his teammates than it's on him. So enlighten me on that, but has not totally wanted to shoot the ball, has looked uncomfortable being super aggressive. I thought he was spooked a little bit by just like the I'm trying to come up with the right word, the ferocity of Deuce McBride's closeouts at times, and it felt much closer to game 1 where like he would kind of be about to shoot, the Knicks would close out, and he'd almost think better of it. Like there's that play that Stan Van Gundy called out where he was driving, like had a chance to finish over Haliburton. We saw some like extraordinary finishes from him in game 4, and he was just sort of like, I'm going to try to throw this back against the grain to Siakam. And like, I'm just like this is something that he's discovered this year, like as a scorer and being hyper aggressive as a scorer. Like, is that version of him going to come out? Does it need to come out? Am I dramatically misjudging what's happening for the sake of a fun narrative here? Like tell me about it. Like what do you look at in this game 6 from Tyrese Haliburton, who I should note, first playoff run, 24 years old. Jalen Brunson was not this good in his first playoff run. So there's a lot of, there are mulligans there that are logical and reasonable, but I'm being a little bit of a jerk. What do you think this game means to him, and how do you think he can perform a little bit better?
It's certainly weird when you have a 3-game stretch where you average 30 and 7, and then the 2 games bookending that are less than 10 shots where a defense, I don't know what the right word is. Like, yeah, they shut him down. I guess that's the right word, but like they do it at the expense of letting other players do well, and they didn't in this game. They did in game 1. So here's what I want to ask him, and I didn't get a chance to do this after I asked him about defense and didn't get a chance to do this after game 5. Is like, is there a moment in it? Because he says this and he's right. He says, it's on me. I have to be more aggressive. I have to find ways to get involved, right? And he is right? Especially after game 1, when he took 6 shots or whatever it was. Like, that's way too few. But I want to know if there's a moment in a game where he feels like he realizes it, like, oh, I haven't been aggressive enough today, right? Or if he gets to the 4th quarter and gets a stat sheet or has a conversation with the coach, and he's like, really? That's all I've done? Or like, really? Like what kind of feel comes with that? Because that would explain a little bit to me about this. Is he is, at least my perception of him, is that he is naturally pass first, right? He led the league in assists per game this season for a reason. He's a very good passer who realized and was rightly coached. Hey, you shooting is more efficient than a lot of stuff you set up during the season. And so it's like a battle internally for a lot of players like him. Luka is very much thinks he's pass first, and Giannis thinks he's pass first, of like trying to get their teammates. It's so funny to call Luka pass first, but anyway, like trying to get other guys to touch the ball versus being like, okay, I have to do it. Right. And so I wonder how much in games that happens to him, where it gets to like the 3rd quarter, the middle 3rd quarter. And it's like, he's like, wait, I've taken 6 shots or something like that, where he sees there's a good matchup, like Josh Hart having 5 inches down on Siakam or something like that, for example. And that's, Josh Hart did well in that matchup in this game. And so he, takes too long trying to get to that too much, or he realizes Deuce McBride's guarding him a certain way, so he's trying to let the rest of his team win 4 and 4. There's just a lot of reasons that, I wonder when he notices in a game and how much it affects what he does for the first however long. That said, it can't happen, right? Like after game 1 of the first round series, it was like, yeah, the Pacers can beat the Bucks if he is a positive. It only takes 6 to 10 shots. They won game 2 of that series on the road. Their only road win in the postseason. I think he took 10 shots that game, right? They can win that way against Milwaukee. But I said after that game, a lot of people said, if they're going to beat the Knicks or have a chance against anyone better than the Knicks, he has to be much better than that and take more shots than that and be more aggressive. And we saw that in the middle of the series, and we didn't see that last night. So I think it's possible they win if he is in the 10 to 12 shot range, if he's guarded the way he was guarded last night, and he's still getting the right players involved at the right times, whether that's Siakam with the mismatch or just keeping the ball moving. Their ball movement was not good at all. I think they went 24 assists. Like, that's pretty low for them. But also he just has to find ways to get himself more involved than that. And some of that's a little bit on his teammates, but I think it's a lot of it is on him. And he always says it's on him. So that was a very long answer. I apologize. I disagree that it's a legacy game. Although admittedly, his stats, like, no one's going to be like, oh my God, he had 19 and 8 in the playoffs. What a beast. You know, like, I think he's had a better postseason than that. But either way, it's on him as much as everyone else, more so, really. And I think he'll know it. And I wonder if he can identify it earlier, or if the Knicks can do something in the first 15, 18 minutes to make him think enough that it changes the way he plays.
Tony, I just want to be clear. I'm just trying to needle him. I want him to listen at the 29-minute mark of this podcast and be like, you know what, F Gavin Schall. I'm going to go out there and take 50 shots tonight. That is what I'm trying to do here. Is
that a real thing? Has any, I don't know, media people like famous media people have been like, oh, they listen to the criticism. Like, is that a thing? Like, I don't know.
I could see like Jordan doing it just as like a self-motivation tactic, but like probably in like a regular season game, not so much in like a.
You know what motivated me as an NBA player?
Yeah,
getting paid to play well, not someone else telling me I'm not playing well. So yeah, it's obviously huge, and like, I don't know what you think, but I would say the point guard that has played better, their team has won every game of the series. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
game 2 is a toss-up. But I would say that's true.
It's a toss-up. Yeah, I think it's been close enough to true to call it a point. But I was just gonna say, like, I think this is the holdup with Tyrese Haliburton, where the fact that he is like such a brilliant basketball mind gets in his own way. To me, the definition of a star is a guy who defies basketball logic and it works for the better for his team. And I think Tyrese, and this is all, like, in his own way, what makes him a star is that, like, he understands basketball logic to the nth degree, like far more than any 24-year-old a couple years into his career has any business understanding it. And because of that, like, it's hard for him to see Pascal Siakam, to your point, at 6'8" on Josh Hart 6'4" and say, like, that is not the right person to go to almost every single time. And like, he almost has to shake that out of his head because, like, he is that talented of a scorer, that talented of a shooter, and just say, screw it. Like, and like Jalen Brunson, like, I don't think Brunson has ever had that issue for a second in his life. Like, he walks into every gym being like, no, like, the best shot is me taking the shot. And if I'm forced not to, like, I know the right reads, I know the right plays to make, and I can do that. But that is the core difference between the two of them. And it's counterintuitive to what you think of a point guard being. But like, it works for each of them in their own way. And I wonder, like, for Haliburton, it certainly is a balance. And then the other thing that, like, just like full circular point here, like, is Indiana just has to get into earlier offense. For them to get into earlier offense, like, they have to
much earlier.
They have to push. But like, that ball movement you're talking about, that passing, that flow you're talking about, like, we saw long stretches where they were totally out of that flow, and it just all goes back to the rebounding. Final question I had for you. Why aren't we seeing more TJ McConnell? Will we see more TJ McConnell? And as much as, like, I think some Knicks fans are saying, like, all right, like, it's a little overblown, like, screw this guy. And like, I agree in the sense that, like, I don't think he's, like, necessarily the matchup issue for Jalen Brunson defensively, like trying to guard Brunson that the announcers have made him out to be based on a fairly small sample size. I do think he's guarded him decently. And I think the bigger thing is just, like, what he brings to the table offensively. And I'm kind of confused at times, like, what Rick Carlisle thinks he's getting by having Andrew Nembhard in there instead of him. And maybe it's as simple as, like, slightly better spacing because the Knicks have to respect his shot a bit more.
Yeah, I like you think McConnell's defended Brunson. Game 2, was it game 2? Game 2 is the only time any Pacer has actually frustrated Jalen Brunson for any stretch of game. It was early second half McConnell on Brunson, and he figured it out. But, like, as good as that has been at times, is really the best option the guy that Jalen Brunson actually can see over? Like, is that really the move? And so you nailed the answer in part of your question is, yeah, he's playing very well at his best this series. Like, every fan base says something like, oh, McConnell plays so good against us. No, he does this to everybody.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah. But is, like, who's out if he's in? right? And it's not just that. It's not Haliburton, duh, right? So it's Nembhard or Nesmith because Siakam. Once you get to Siakam and Turner, it's too small. And so if it's one of those guys, well, if it's Haliburton and McConnell together now, what limitation do you have offensively if McConnell's taking it up and Haliburton doesn't have the ball, right? That already changes what you're doing. Or the other way around, if Haliburton has the ball, McConnell's made some threes in this series. He's a better shooter now than he ever was before, but no one gets playoffs. No one guards him, right? Like for a reason. So you nailed it with the Nembhard part. It's like, who do you take out? And is that trade-off of better defense, if you even get it, because Brunson just kills everybody, worth it for what could be? Not guaranteed to be, because they have had success with McConnell and Haliburton together this season, but could be decreased offense. The best spots for McConnell, as you've seen all series, is when he's the one and Pascal's the four. That's a lot of ball handling. It's a lot of offensive talent for a second unit. That's good defense for a second group. Those bigger groups with Siakam plus the center plus Toppin have been great. When they go small now, whenever Jericho Sims is in there for some reason, or when pressure's at the 5, those units have been great. But it's really hard with the starters to get him in there, and that's why there's like an odd cap on his minutes. I did say after game 2, I think he should play a little more, but I don't know exactly how they do that without cooking up too much of what they're doing, because if it gets solved, then it causes more problems than it solves. But maybe if you're desperate in game 6, they play him 25, 26, something like that minutes, and hope those 4 minutes aren't just the Knicks being like, oh, this is easy, we've got this right away.
He spooks me every time he's on the I just don't. I'm happier when he's on the bench, and as someone rooting for the other team, that is probably the best compliment I can give a player.
MSG, I've had a great time in there. I love the exasperated Knicks fan sound when TJ McConnell scores. It is unlike any other player on the Pacers scoring. I can't explain it.
Well, they just don't believe their eyes. I think they're like, what are you like? And it's like for a team, obviously, like Dante DiVincenzo is bigger and stronger, but if it's just a white guy thing, like you've watched Dante DiVincenzo be great all year long, like you can't not believe that. But I don't know. The
organ shuts off. They cut to Bobby Flay on the sideline. The fans are watching, and the shortest guy in the court wiggles out of paint, hits some 8-footer. Oh, come on. It's awesome. It's been very fun.
Yeah,
and then the Knicks won by 30.
Well, maybe we'll get one more experience with that. We will find out. He's Tony East. I'm Gavin Schall. We'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Pacers.